Today we're making a simple bone broth. Now I bought my bones from the local grocery store, but I'm also adding some trimmings of beef fat and little pieces of beef that I've saved from marinating my beef. Now the first step that we're gonna do is we're gonna preheat our oven to roast the bones so that they get more flavor and coloring in our stock. I use the cast iron pan. I place the bones and the meat and gristle around it and then threw it in the oven for coloring and extra flavor. Now you're just gonna brown these bones and move them around once in a while. An extra tip that you could add to this is you could add a little bit of tomato paste. It brings out a little bit more flavor and coloring in your stock. The next thing I added that I find is pretty essential is onions. You can just use the onion scraps, but that will turn your bone broth orange. So today I'm saving my scraps and I'm just using the actual onion, which just adds flavor, and I'm browning them a little for a little bit of color, but it will be more on the brown side instead of the red from the skin. Now when you chop your onions up to put into your stock, it does not matter what size it is. You just want to have them cut down so that you can maximize the flavor out of all of the onions. You're going to throw these onions in with your bones and meat to get a little bit of coloring on them and brown them up so that they add extra flavor. Now you just let this sit in the oven, get a little bit of color. Now I could have went a little further and browned it even a little bit more, but I wanted to be careful that I didn't burn anything. So you're going to place your bones nicely into a pot, and then you're going to scrape all the onion and meat and fat into the pot. Then we're going to get some water, and then I also deglaze that pan to get the rest of the flavor and coloring out of it. Now, only thing you need to do here is make sure the bones are covered with water. And then I will deglaze that other pan with water. Now, you can use a red wine to add more flavor and more coloring, but we're really doing this on a bare bones. And I'm just trying to show you the basics of extracting flavor from bones. There is two spices that I do find that really add to the flavor of any broth: 2 bay leaves and whole black peppercorns, and that is it. Then you'll let that just simmer down. Don't add salt at all to any of my stocks or my broths. And in my opinion, this really isn't a broth, but it kind of is because I threw a little bit of meat in. The difference between bone stock and broth is that you usually boil the meat, and in stock you extract the flavor from the bones. Now this is medium-low heat. This process does take between 3 and 6 hours. And you just continue to keep boiling it and moving it around and making sure everything is under the water. And usually you know it's done when the bone marrow easily falls out of the bones. Can mix it around. Some people will say it makes it cloudy, but really we're just trying to get out the flavor and the nutrition that is left in the bones. This is just a method of extracting the flavor. As you can see, it doesn't have much color, but as you continue to keep boiling it and simmering it, it will add more color. An important thing about stocks or any kind of flavoring extraction is you do not add salt, because we are reducing this down. This kind of reminds me of my way my grandmother would have cooked stock. She probably would have used just scraps, or after you butcher a bull or a calf, you have all these bones and you really don't have much to do with them except feed them to your dogs. So the best thing to do is to boil all the bones down to get out the nutrition from it. Now once you've boiled your bone broth, you can use a cheesecloth, but I actually have a purpose for the fat in the end that I will show you. Bone broth, you're just gonna strain it. I pull out the bones because they clump into the strainer and splash all over. So once you have strained your broth. You're now gonna extract the marrow, which usually should just fall out of the bone like that. Bone is now empty. Now you can feed it to your dogs. Once you have this bone marrow, what to do with it is you could do a couple things with it. I usually throw it in with my rice to give it a nice beefy taste, or you can use it as cooking fat. When you're about to cook something, you just throw a little bit of the bone marrow into it and you just mix it in and it will cook down. And whatever you're cooking it, eggs, frying rice, cooking onions, your vegetables, it will just give it a nice beefier, earthier taste. This is the bone broth after. It does have a layer of grease on top. You will not be able to remove the grease or beat the grease into the liquid. I'm going to show you what I do with the grease after you let it cool for a little bit. It will form a nice layer of fat on top of your bone broth, just like this. What I do is I scoop all the fat off the top of the liquid and store it as a cooking fat. It does have a higher temperature than butter, so you can cook things a little higher. Gives it a nice beefier taste. This method I'm doing right now is a quick short video that I made about bone broth. I didn't roast the bones this time. I didn't roast it with anything. I just threw it all into the water. I used marrow, onions, carrots, celery, and I put it into it and just boiled it down. As you can tell, because I used the skins, turns the stock a little red. Now this method that I'm doing right now is just all my scraps from the month, which is carcasses from chickens, chicken bones, chicken leg bones, any kind of bone that I eat, and I take all the meat off. I save it in the freezer, put it in bags, and then typically I have onions, celery, carrots. I do have people that juice celery, so I do have a lot of celery pulp in with the stock. The main thing you just need to understand is that it takes a little bit of time, like 3 to 6 hours. Boil down everything. Just make sure when you're making stocks or broths that you cover everything with the liquid and reduce it down. It does have flavor. When you add different types of vegetables, like you have a lot of onions, it usually has more of an onion flavor, and it also has a red tinge from the skin. This is typically just scraps, so really anything you get from this, I would call it more, instead of calling it broth or stock, I just call it a cooking liquid. You can make pasta in it, you can boil your rice in it, you can boil your potatoes in it. When it says add water, instead you can add your flavoring liquid or stock. And the best thing about this is I do this monthly, so every month the liquid changes a little bit depending on what scraps I use the most. I'm just progressively showing you footage of me boiling it down, and this is what it looks like. And then I will strain this out, put it into containers, and then freeze it for when I need it.
And don't forget to grab yourself a copy of Dr. Wallach's Cooking Without the Bad Foods. It is a traditional cookbook that has been rewritten without the bad foods, especially gluten and no oil. It is 300 pages jammed with recipes and a great textbook to follow.
And don't forget to check us out on Notice Foods on Instagram, where we have tons of content. You can ask us any questions and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you.